Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our monthly State Policy Action Zoom meeting. I'm Jeff Garris. I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan research and advocacy organization that advocates for policies that allow for the broadest sharing of prosperity across Pennsylvania and freedom and opportunity for everyone in Pennsylvania. I'm very pleased to be joined here by a number of my colleagues from the Pennsylvania Policy Center. We do have a few folks on our team who are normally part of helping to run these meetings who are not able to be with us today. So please bear with us. We don't have our normally tight system that we do for doing these meetings quite in place today. So please bear with us on this. We are very excited to be talking about an important topic today. As I think many of you know, if you've attended any of these meetings, we got through more than a third of this fiscal year, which started on July 1st, without a state budget. And it was largely due to stalling and shenanigans by Senate Republicans. They finally came around and passed a budget last week. There have been a lot of challenges for organizations and for departments and services that are funded by our state budget, not having that in place for so long. But we are excited to have that budget in place. We're going to be talking about some of the aspects of the budget that we're really excited about, some of the things we're pretty unhappy about. We want to start thinking ahead to the 2026 budget season. Yes, it's hard to believe we just passed this year's budget, but we are only about 10 weeks away from the start of the budget season when the governor will propose the budget on the first Tuesday in February. And then, of course, the goal is to have a balanced budget passed and enacted by July 1st. They were pretty far off this year. We're going to talk about what some of the issues were there. All of your lines are muted, so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat in the bottom of the screen there. I will get to as many of these questions as we can after we've heard from our speakers, and we will pose as many of these as possible for the time that permits. We do wrap these up before 2 p.m., and that is our goal here today. I want to introduce our panelists today. We're very excited to have them with us. We're going to be hearing first from Pennsylvania Policy Center Executive Director Marc Stier. We'll be talking about the overall budget picture. Then we'll be going to State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. She represents the people from the 184th State House District in Pennsylvania, which encompasses parts of Center City, Philadelphia. She is also the majority chair of the State House Energy Committee. We're really pleased to have Representative Fiedler with us here today. And then we'll be hearing from another important ally in the budget advocacy this year, Connor Descheemaker. They are the statewide campaign manager with Transit for All PA. Really pleased to have Connor here. Connor's going to need to step out a little bit early. Connor agreed to do this from the road, and they will be hopping on a plane while some of us are probably still logging out of the meeting. So we're really pleased that you made the time to be here with us, Connor. On that note, again, if you have any questions, comments, any issues with tech, please drop that in the chat, and we'll do as much of that as we can today. On that note, I'm turning it over to Marc Stier. Marc.
Thanks, Jeff, and I've shared my screen. I assume you will tell me if you can't see it. So the title of my brief talk today is drawn from the Sergio Leone movie. Some of you may remember that. This may be new to all of you, but you should go see it. It's a good movie if you have a chance. So we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly in this state budget. And let's start with the good, because there is some, and some of the good stuff is really, really good, I should say. And particularly the two things I want to talk about right now. Number one, we've had another big round of adequacy funding for K-12 education. There's over $900 million in new money for our K-12 schools, about $565 million in adequacy money going through the formula that sends all this money to the, minus just a little bit, to the most underfunded school districts in Pennsylvania. This is the second year we've done this. We need to do it 7 more times to meet our constitutional and moral responsibility to fully and fairly fund our schools. But it's a big deal that we did it last year. We set up a formula last year as well. And this year we're following in the second step using that very same formula, or with, again, slight changes. There's another $105 million in basic education funding, $40 million in special education funding. And there's a really big thing we got $178 million in cyber charter savings. The cyber charters, as those of you who've heard me or our ally Susan Spicker from Education Voters talk about it, know have been ripping off the Commonwealth and ripping off our schools. We've got them under control now. And while it's only $78 million in new money, it's $178 million transfer from cyber charters to K-12 education. And then there was another $125 million in facilities. It's not nearly enough of what we need in the long run, but again, another big step in the right direction. The second big thing is we passed our working families tax credit. And I'm glad we have Representative Fiedler here because I think she was the first champion of this a couple of sessions ago. And Representative Christina Sappi was the chief sponsor this year in the House. And she actually named it because the program is a state piggyback on top of the federal earned income tax credit. But we can't call it the EITC in Pennsylvania because we have a bad EITC, a program that is basically a tax credit voucher program for our schools. So she named it the Working Families Tax Credit because that's a really good name for it, and that's what it does. It gives working families in Pennsylvania 10% of what they get from the federal earned income tax credit. That is on top of the tax forgiveness program that we already have for low-income Pennsylvanians. It's a refundable program, unlike the tax forgiveness program, so that even if you don't owe personal income tax in Pennsylvania, you can get the refund back if you're eligible for it. About 1.1 million families in Pennsylvania are going to get something under this working families tax credit. I think the average amount is between $600 and $700. And look, this is, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but we're talking about families who have an average income before government transfers of $13,000 to $14,000 a year. So that $600 to $700 around tax time is going to be a big thing for them. And look, this is just the first step. I always joke with folks, I say, when Social Security first went into effect, it covered about 17 to 19 people in the country, and we slowly expanded it. Now, we got a 10% piggyback on the federal EITC. I expect in future years, we're going to ratchet that up to 12 to 15 to 20 and up to what we originally wanted was 30. And that'll give people 3 times what they're getting now. It is a really good program. It comes on top of the child independent tax credit that was passed last session, and on top of the property tax exemption for seniors and disabled that was also passed. We've seen the House Democrats take a number of steps forward towards providing tax benefits for working people. And this is the third one. And we've gotten it through the Senate despite their reluctance to accept tax credits for working people. I'll say a little bit more about the whole process in a little bit. I also want to say a huge amount of organizing went into these 2 victories. The education funding would not have happened without the Pennsylvania Schools Works campaign, which Penn Policy is a part of, which Jeff plays a major role in doing the field campaign there, and our whole team contributes to. And the Working Families Tax Credit has been championed by our Pennsylvanians Together campaign for 5 or 6 years now. We've been doing policy papers, we've been holding press conferences, we've been doing social media, and we finally, thanks to I think Joanna McClinton insisting in the last minute in the negotiations that the Senate Republicans buy into this, that we finally got it done this year, and I am really, really pleased we've been able to do it. So now let's turn to the I think it was Lee Van Cleef character in the movie. The bad. What was bad about this budget? Number one, a lot of the budget is flat funded because the Republicans insisted that we come in almost $1.4 billion lower than Governor Shapiro's proposal from last February. After inflation, less is going to be spent on critical programs. That includes a lot of workforce development programs, career and technical education, ARCs, some economic development programs, including those that help historically disadvantaged businesses, food programs, most of our colleges and universities, most health programs aside from medical assistance and those for intellectual disabilities, but including mental health programs that were flat funded. childcare, veterans programs are flat funded. When we say something's flat funded, we mean they're getting the same thing this year that they got last year. And as you know, given inflation, if you spend, $100 million this year like you did last year, you have less impact this year because that $100 million isn't as effective as it was a year ago. So some of this was compensated for by some new programs, including Governor Shapiro's Business PA program, a neurodegenerative disease research program, and a child care recruitment and retention program. These are good things, but they don't make up for the flat funding of so much of the budget. Another bad thing, there's no minimum wage increase for the 18th year in a row. And that's a really terrible thing. The minimum wage is worth less than half of what it was 18 years ago. And it's just shameful that this state has fallen so far behind most other states, and in fact, every state around us, including West Virginia, in the wage we pay our workers. And then the third big problem is that there's no permanent public transit funding. I'm not going to talk about that because we got a real expert on it speaking later in the program, so I'm going to stop there. Let me just say that one reason the budget had bad things in it is that the negotiations this year were really, really difficult. We're really grateful for the governor and for the House Democrats for standing up for the things we want. But, the Republican Senate said no to most of them. And we had a double negotiation. Democrats were negotiating with the Senate Republican leaders, and they were negotiating with their caucus because all the Republican senators are right wing, but half of them are pretty nuts. And the leader of the nuts never wanted to sign on to this budget at all. So it was a very, very difficult negotiation, and we should be grateful to our leadership for standing up for the stuff we got. Finally, let's talk about the Eli Wallach portion of the budget, and that's the ugly. Now we've gone 2 good years in which the House Democrats have passed a progressive agenda, including many things that did not get through the Senate, but some of them that did, including the good things I talked about today. How has that happened? Why, after so many years where you heard me reporting on deep frustration with the budget, how have we passed this agenda? Well, there are 2 differences. Number one, we have a Democratic House of Representatives led by people and that including a caucus of people who are really pretty progressive on the whole. And second, we had a budget surplus. So we could do a lot of this new spending for education and for the tax cuts and for bunches of other programs without raising taxes. But the problem right now is the current year budget has a deep deficit of at least $4 billion. And what I mean by that is that the amount of money we spend will be $4 billion more than the amount of revenues we get. And we didn't add new revenues this year, despite Governor Shapiro's proposals to tax video games of skill and to legalize and tax adult use cannabis. There are no other revenue proposals that passed this year. How are we balancing the budget, which, as you know, is a constitutional requirement in Pennsylvania? We're running down the surplus that was originally $13 billion that we got through COVID financing from the federal government during the pandemic. That surplus is running out. We are at the current rate of spending of over $4 billion above of what we bring in revenues, and with only $7.7 billion left in the surplus. Do the math. We run out of money at a year, not next year, but the year after budget. And then we're in trouble because not only do we have to pay for this budget that we have now, but we still haven't funded K-12 education at the level we need. We still haven't funded public transit. We still haven't funded higher education the way we should. We still haven't funded roads and bridges the way we should. We're going to need to raise new revenues at some point. We're not going to talk about how to do that today, but I can assure you, you will be hearing very much from me and from other members of this team talking about how we can fairly raise revenues from the people who don't pay their fair share, which is the richest people in Pennsylvania and multinational corporations, so that we can keep this progress going from the last 2 years well into the future. And with that, I will stop and guess I turn it over to Representative Fiedler.
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody. Hoping you can hear me. Thank you so much for having me. And Mark, thank you for the good, the bad, and the ugly summary of the budget. That broke it down pretty good. So I am State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. I represent South Philadelphia, House District 184. And as I said in the introduction, I also serve as the Majority Chair of the House Energy Committee. That is a brand new committee, less than a year old, focused on energy. And we're doing a lot of focus on affordability and trying to make sure that energy is reliable and affordable, as in you can pay your bills and when you flip on the switch, the lights come on. Trying to really focus on that in the committee. That said, as Mark and Jeff mentioned, I care deeply about tax reform. I am so excited about the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit, which one of my colleagues, Tarek Khan, referred to as cash back in your pocket. Which I thought was a good shorthand for what we're talking about here. Jeff also mentioned, or perhaps Mark did, Representative Christina Sappy, who I want to give a huge shout out to. This is her legislation. The idea, I believe, came to her via United Way, and I was just texting with her earlier today to say just a huge congratulations. Rep. Sappy was a real champion for this and continues to be, and I'm just lucky to work with her in the legislature. As you heard, also shout out to Speaker Joanna McClinton, who very much fought for this. She wanted it to get over the line, and she recognized that this tax credit would bring $193 million in tax relief to people all across Pennsylvania. So often when we're talking about budgets, and especially state budgets, we're talking about how we do not have money. And this is a direct attempt by the state to put money back into people's pockets. So I am especially excited about it. I think it also really, the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit shows us that not all tax credits are created equally. So often we hear about tax credits for corporations, tax credits to produce certain things. This is a tax credit for people, and it's for the people who need it most, people who are working, and also really who fall in that gap. They do not qualify financially for most public assistance programs, but they also often do not have the money they need to pay their bills. We all know that bills are going up, whether you're talking about grocery bills, energy bills, daycare, other childcare, bills are going up, costs are going up. And so this Working Pennsylvanians tax credit is really an effort by our caucus and the state legislature to help people who fit in that gap right there between public assistance and being able to afford everything. We've also been careful to make sure that this is something that will automatically happen. We want to make it as easy as possible. We know that people are facing a lot of challenges right now. In many cases, honestly, especially people I talk to in my district, people are already working 2 jobs and they're considering getting a 3rd job, or they have 1 full-time job and they're full-time caregiver for a loved one. So we wanted to make this as easy as possible for working people to qualify for. And I think it's really, it's an example of what we can do on a bipartisan basis, honestly, in a space where a lot of things are pretty slow and sometimes impossible to get done. So I think this is like a bright and shining example of what we absolutely can do. It is tied to the federal tax credit, as Mark was mentioning. And so, you know, it's really sort of on top of what we've already been doing in terms of tax policy to help people. And it's just one part of the $50.1 billion budget that we passed. Governor Shapiro did mention earlier this week, Tuesday, I think, he was sort of breaking it down. And I thought he did it in a really helpful way. He was talking about the fact that a single mom who's raising 3 kids and making $25,000 a year, maybe working as a waitress, she could get almost $800 back on her state taxes, on top of all the assistance that she might be getting back from the federal government. $800. To some people, that's not a lot of money. To a lot of people I know, that's a huge chunk of money. That's groceries for a couple months. That's being able to pay their utility bills. Sorry, I have 2 babies at home. Some of my the youngest Pennsylvanians. So $800 coming back. Thank you for the heart for my babies. $800 going back into the pockets of working Pennsylvanians. That's a lot of money for people, and we're talking about that in 2025. So that's something that people will be able to fill out when they're doing their taxes now, or in a couple of months, over the next couple of months, that will provide direct relief to people who need it most. And again, I want to emphasize, like, this was a bipartisan win. Senator Linda Culver and other folks are on the record as saying that they think this is a good thing to help people who are working hard, who are facing rising bills. And so I do think it's a good example and hopefully a roadmap for us to be able to get other good things done, ideally on tax policy, for low income folks and for working class folks, because obviously we know a lot of people are having a really hard time. I did want to just give, like, quickly some numbers on it. So the tax credit is designed, as I said, for working people who have a total income of up to $61,000 if they're filing alone, $68,000 if they're filing jointly, and eligibility for it is based on the federal EITC, which I mentioned is really mostly for low and medium income workers. Workers with kids, I'm a mom of 4. Workers with kids can qualify for a bigger credit that increases with the number of children up to 3 or more kids. We know, as I said, we talk about this a lot in our caucus, the cost of having a family and raising children it's sky high, and it's only going higher. And so we know that this $800 really can make a big difference for a lot of people. The maximum for it raises to $432 for households with 1 child, $715 if they have 2 children, and $805 for households with 3 or more. We are really excited about that, really grateful to the governor for also championing this policy. And I think really shows what's possible and will help to set the stage for more wins to come in future budgets. As you heard, hopefully the next budget being sooner rather than later, given that we are already in November. I had these babies in April and came back in time for the budget, which was supposed to be done June 30th. And of course, that came and went. And in all seriousness, I think this is a good budget in many ways. I'm happy, like so happy about the education spending and the working Pennsylvanians tax credit. You're going to hear about transit in a minute, and we continue to have that at the top of our priority list. I live in South Philly. I take the bus everywhere. My family relies on it. Many of my constituents rely on it. Many people who either choose to take mass transit or don't have another way of getting around or getting to work. And so transit 100% is at the top of our list, and we have to get it done. So I'm glad that Connor is here to talk about that. But I do think there's a lot of big wins, environmental wins, education wins, and absolutely the working Pennsylvanians tax credit, which I hope we can continue to build on in future years. The last thing I wanted to say, Mark gave a teaser for it, but I hope you'll have me back to talk about everyone's favorite, revenue. We need to generate revenue, more revenue, not from the pockets of working people, but from some of those big multinational corporations and incredibly, incredibly wealthy people who have a bunch of money that they should be actually investing and paying in taxes to invest in our Commonwealth and things like parks and mass transit. Turns out there is money out there to do these things. We just need to be really serious and smart about investing it. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to stay on and listen to Connor's portion of the presentation. I'm excited for it. And I'm just really grateful to Penn Policy and all the advocates, everybody who, I don't know if you know, but when you send an email or make a phone call to your elected, it really does matter. So thank you so much. And I'm going to mute myself and these little babies here, but glad to be with you.
Awesome. Should I just go ahead and get started, Jeff, or
Yeah.
is there a quick transition?
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, go right ahead. Yep.
Oh, wonderful.
Yep. No,
Okay.
that's fine.
Well, yeah, thank you all so much for having me. My name is Connor Descheemaker. I am a statewide campaign manager for Transit for All PA. We are a rider and worker-led campaign for fully funded public transportation in all 67 counties. We had been an organization that was run on donated time from a few different disparate nonprofits for the last 4 years, where we drafted a platform, And I am the first person to really be a staff person for this since January of this year. Many of you may have seen our Transit for All PA funding proposal, of which Representative Fiedler is a co-sponsor because it is still active legislation, but it is explicitly that revenue generation. So before getting too ahead of myself, though, to talk about the budget more broadly, the thing that has been very fascinating and frustrating about this budget process is that everything this year was on a path of escalation. We as advocates, started before the governor's budget address, hosted a several hundred person rally in Harrisburg in June, and along the way hosted a variety of several hundred person virtual calls where we drafted, ratified, and then shopped around our that funding proposal. And we have been told repeatedly by legislators that this is the most they've been contacted about any issue ever, was something that I heard from more than one state legislator. And despite all of that, we reached September, August, September, and we still did not have a state budget. And at that time, Senators Ferry, Penny Cook, and Picozzi together were, supporting this sort of first and only proposal by the Senate Republicans, saying that we should not only be flexing our transit agencies' already sparse capital funding, but that we also should be flexing some of that transit capital money into road and bridge capital funding. So a huge slap in the face to folks who are facing, a $5 billion and growing state of good repair deficit for SEPTA alone on the capital side. The newest trains on the SEPTA system are about 30 years old at this point, but most is 40 to 60 years old. And so despite seeing some sort of unified response to that initial Senate Republican proposal that flexing capital money is not a solution, within about 2 weeks, our governor, which we can say on the record now, our governor told our two largest transit agencies, SEPTA in the Philadelphia region and PRT in the Pittsburgh region, to request from PennDOT a 2-year runway. And so that is what happened. SEPTA and Pittsburgh Regional Transit both requested to flex about 2 years worth of their operating funding gap. So the amount of money that they say was a structural deficit, the bare minimum to maintain the status quo, which, important to remind folks, the status quo in Pennsylvania for public transportation service is loss. Every single transit system in the Commonwealth, with the exception of the Lanta system in the Lehigh Valley, which we're going to bookmark and come back to in a little bit, has lost service since 2019. So what we were saying in this, grand solution offered by our governor was not even going to restore service, much less expand it. It would just lock in the status quo, which is service loss. So as we've been reaching the end of this budget cycle, we were told that transit was off the table suddenly, after it being the most animating issue of this year's budget fight. And so we came to a resolution, and no new money was available for public transportation operations, much less capital. And while we have been, told and fed the message that, they found a temporary solution. This is the third or fourth temporary solution for SEPTA and PRT, our two largest systems. For Lanta, which serves Lehigh and Northampton counties, they are still facing a structural deficit. They are still facing service cuts and fare increases in January of this year. And they and all systems smaller than them, which is everybody else, do not have the ability to request that capital flex in the same ways that SEPTA and PRT have the ability to make those requests of PennDOT. So right now, Lanta is having basically private negotiations with PennDOT to access some sort of mysterious pool of money to keep them from experiencing service cuts in the next 2 years. And also, despite there being, again, a 2-year runway, quote unquote, for SEPTA and PRT, the Red Rose Transit Service in Lancaster, the BARDA system in Berks County in Reading, the Rabbit Transit System, which serves 10 counties across sort of central to eastern Pennsylvania, Westmoreland Transportation Authority, among others, all are going to face service cuts and fare increases in January of 2027. Again, sooner than the 2-year runway that we have been sold by folks in power. And so this is sort of where we find ourselves, is really needing to actively dispel the message that transit is something that is either solved or only a Philadelphia and Pittsburgh issue. Similarly, nobody at the top has been talking about the structural deficit facing our shared ride and paratransit service. Currently, as but one example, Red Rose Transit in Lancaster is taking $4 million every year from its fixed route bus service. So they don't operate a lot of service. So $4 million, that's quite a lot. And that is just to maintain the status quo in their federally required shared ride and paratransit service. So this is a catastrophic situation that is affecting even the most rural counties in Pennsylvania. The PPTA, which is the statewide association of transit agencies, does have some good tools and research on it, but that's what our charge is going to be over this next year, is centering the crisis facing our shared ride and paratransit service. And the folks on this call know as well as anybody, the folks who ride paratransit and shared ride, that's not a luxury. That's not a dependable, reliable, frequent service. Frequently, I hear from folks who use that to get to work, that it could show up anywhere in a 2-hour window. And that is under the current circumstances, the status quo circumstances. So what we are asking when we say $60 million structural deficit, that's to maintain that already crummy service. So again, in this year ahead, that's what we're going to be centering, is focusing on the non-Philly, non-Pittsburgh, opportunities for growth and strengthening, and really saying to Governor Shapiro that he, may like to think that this issue can, just wait until after his reelection, and it cannot. Our, most rural and most transit-dependent places are reliant on it, because, now we have data from groups like NRDC that show us that despite the lack of transit ridership density, that doesn't mean there isn't a density of people who are disabled. That doesn't mean there is not a density of people who cannot drive due to age, due to socioeconomic status, due to immigration status. We still see that across Pennsylvania, 20% of residents cannot operate a motor vehicle. And so they are reliant on carpools. They are reliant on a whole bunch of things. Even our most rural transit system, Area Transportation Authority in North Central PA, 40% of their trips are to get to work. And then a majority of their trips are of working age people. So if we are able to stand up transit in those most rural places that is frequent, that is reliable, that actually serves people's needs, then there's a way to get people employed. There's a way to stimulate economic growth. There's a way to provide mobility, better healthcare outcomes, all the things that we believe in. And so, again, I think that's the real message we have coming out of this budget cycle is nothing has been solved. And we need to be clear-eyed in that and be accountable to folks. And I want to be clear, I am actively not talking about Rep. Fiedler, Senator Saval, Rep. Kraszewski, others that have been, steadfast in their support of transit. But there are a variety of folks, on both sides of the aisle who have been quick to give up transit at the negotiating table now for 3 years running. And that's what we're moving into 2027 with.
Well, thank you so much for that really sobering and disturbing analysis of what we didn't get in the budget this time, Connor. And thank you to everybody for the comments and questions in the chat. We're going to get to as many of these as we can. And what I'm going to try to do here is Connor is actually doing this meeting on the road and will be catching a plane very, very soon, and we'll need to leave the meeting a little bit before our intended end time of 2 p.m. So I'm going to take a couple of questions on transit first for Connor, and then we'll get to some of the other questions on revenue and the tax credits and all of that. So starting off real quickly, Connor, there's a note. Freda, who's in Erie, notes that EMPTA needs money for service and operations, not just capital improvements and infrastructure. I think we can all agree with that one. Jason, who's here in Philadelphia, where I'm located, notes that the oldest train car in SEPTA's fleet is the Silverliner 4, which was delivered between 1973 and 1976. They are older than me, Jason notes. I'm going to tell you, I know Jason. Jason's not a young fella either. And just as creaky. I'm not going to go that far, but he wants to know, how do we get full investment into public transit statewide?
I think this is going to be the charge of a lot of folks in this group: revenue generation. And there is not a one cool trick, despite what folks seem to want us to believe, that is going to solve our problems. The governor's, now 3-year running proposal to shift the sales tax allocation, but not the tax itself. That, again, only preserves the status quo, which is a service that is barely making ends meet. And so to sort of tie it to that other piece that folks are talking about, or that people are asking about, flex, it's basically taking your rent money to buy groceries. That is not a solution. It is, and it is going to leave you with a much worse problem, down the road. And so we're in a position where, again, our infrastructure is physically falling apart. Within a couple weeks of this, SEPTA's regional rail trains were deemed an imminent fire hazard. It was pretty remarkable how quickly it caught up with us. And what happens when you flex that money is that you end up with a situation where you have delayed or canceled accessibility and safety improvements. Because SEPTA and PRT and a variety of systems across the Commonwealth, we know they are not compatible with the ADA because the infrastructure is too old. And so this only further delays the implementation of the ADA, which we know also the ADA is not real accessibility. That's not universal design. That's the bare minimum for folks. And to get us into full investment, again, we need new revenue generation, and we need to be thinking expansively about what's there. I'll drop in an email to Jeff, actually, so it can be included in follow-up. Our funding proposal, again, that is an active piece of legislation in both the House and Senate, with dozens of co-sponsors from all corners of Pennsylvania. And it's, when the proposals that we have in there are things that are things like a rideshare tax, something that is implemented on a statewide level in Kentucky. We have an increase to the car lease and car rental fee, two things that have not been touched in 35 years and are disproportionately used by upper income folks, as well as business travelers. And so these are things that are not the same old, oh, we're just going to raise the sales tax. We're just going to raise the sales tax that we just keep going to the well on. These are specific targeted things related to transit that can raise real new revenue for us to get to that full investment in public transit statewide, not on a local level, because we see even just this past week, Westmont Borough near Johnstown, they voted to decrease their allocation to Camtran, which is the transit agency there. And so any of these schemes that we see to increase local match requirements for local governments for operations, those small boroughs and townships already cannot afford their local match. And so again, this is service cuts by another name when we say, oh, local governments need to step up. I'm not talking about Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I'm not even talking about Lancaster for that matter. I'm talking about all of the boroughs and townships that surround are major cities in the Lehigh Valley, that surround State College in Center County, that surround Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, those kinds of things.
Thanks, Connor. One more follow-up here related to transit, and then we'll go on to some of the revenue questions that we've got and tax credit questions. I'll let you know, you'll be happy to know that Mitch in Northeast Philly has said in the chat, we're ready to put more pressure on Senator Picozzi here in the 5th District. So thank you, Mitch. We knew we could count on you. There are two other questions here, and I'm going to put them both together here so you can address them. One is from Claire, whose question is the stubbornness of Republicans to fund public transit caused by the bribes they get from corporations, or WTF? And then the other question here is, what can we do as individuals and members of other organizations to push for better transit systems?
These are great questions. So when it comes to the reticence to fund public transit, a thing that is important to us to message is that we use a specific illustrative example. So I talked earlier about the Lehigh Valley. They have restored service and they've restored ridership. They did all the things that a lot of folks want these systems to do. Folks that are more fiscally conservative, they want to see, oh, did you restore ridership? Did you restore service? Lanta did that, and they still can't pay their bills. And I want to say that in our meetings with legislators in a lot of these communities, they do not know that. I'll tell you, we had a meeting with Rep. Fitzpatrick's staff. I know that's a national level, but he had no idea that the transit system in his district, or adjacent to his district, is facing service cuts. He'd only heard about SEPTA. And so that is the thing that we can do as individuals and members of other organizations, is to organize together. So that is what we are doing this year. We have seen, as Transit for All PA, the number of people in our database more than quadruple in the span of less than a year. We went from 10,000 to 45,000 people in our network. So I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. I'm going to drop our website in the chat. We always have a letter campaign that folks can be sending any time of year with the most up-to-date stuff. And I'm proud to say that if you're in the Lehigh Valley, there's a public meeting you can attend on Monday. If you live in Lancaster, we're doing a rally there on the 9th of December. If you live anywhere outside of the Philly and Pittsburgh regions, we're having a virtual organizing meeting that is coming up on the 3rd. And then in the new year next year, we're going to be hiring a series of fellows in 4 target regions across Pennsylvania that are going to serve as our organizing homes to push for better transit systems on that hyper-local level, because it does take that local pressure on the system and on local elected officials to show that there is demand for good quality public services in those communities. And then we can show that as part of a network of us working across Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much, Connor. Thank you for bringing so much helpful information to us. I know that you need to get going. I do want to note, we just got 2 more quick questions there in the chat for you from Andreas and Mitch, and we know you want to drop your email and contact info there in the chat. So I know you need to step away, and so I just want to thank you now very much for joining us and participating today.
I actually can answer that quick question about the low-income zero fare program.
Sure.
Tonight in Philadelphia, there is an affordability town hall that is focused on transit, being hosted by Senator Saval and Councilmember Nick O'Rourke, that's being hosted by one of our sibling organizations, Transit Forward Philadelphia. I'll pop that link in the chat there. There's also a petition being run by Transit Forward Philadelphia right now to push for expanding the low-income zero fare program in Philadelphia. So there are people doing all of the things that folks are asking about here, and we know that we're never reaching everybody. So I'm very excited for every opportunity to get to meet more of you and bring you into the movement.
Thanks so much, Connor. We're going to go to some other questions we have here in the chat, and I appreciate everybody being patient as we pull these together. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them. We're getting more of them coming in right now, but I do want to go to a couple of comments and questions that were related to Representative Fiedler talking about the working families tax credit. And, one of the things and I'm going to just summarize, there are a number of different folks who commented. There was, expression of like, well, that's nice to get a little bit of extra money in a tax credit, but I'd rather see us pushing for like continuing services. And, this doesn't address the minimum wage. And I think one person put it best. I think it was put this way, and then I'm going to go to you, Rep. Fiedler, that the question, what they said was, not to be a Debbie Downer, but bragging about the tax credit without raising the minimum wage, no big healthcare assistance, et cetera, is a little clueless. Another couple other folks said, well, we do want to see this. I'm reminded, I think it was maybe in the last session when you actually got the vote in the House on the working families tax credit. And I remember you talked about it. If I'm mistaken, you can correct this and then I'll let you answer this. But I think I remember you came home and you had like a big sort of celebration with your family and your children because you had gotten this vote on this legislation that had taken years. And I think one of your kids was sort of like, that took that long to get that done. And it was sort of a little bit of a surprise that it would have taken that much effort and that long to get something like this done. And so I just want to note, and I'll turn it over to you, but, we would have liked to have seen the General Assembly fund the public schools at the full level that they should be at to comply with the Constitution. But we knew that they were not going to put in $4 billion for that this year. And we pushed for, getting the significant expansions we need. And we're going to need to do that for several years consistently. I don't know that that means that we failed because we didn't get all the funding this year. So I just want to help with people's expectations and sort of with the challenges that really committed and dedicated defenders and champions for the people face when they're in Harrisburg trying to get something done. Rep. Fiedler.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And thank you, everybody, for taking time to be on this call. I really do appreciate it. And thank you, Connor, for your ongoing work on transit. It really is something that we absolutely have to get done. And so I appreciate that. I'm excited about the fellows being added. I think that's awesome. So the fine folks at Penn Policy asked me to come on and talk. Really, they asked me to come on and talk about one thing, the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit, which I'm glad to, and I see as a big victory. I actually have like pages and many notes here of all the things I was hoping to squeeze into my time, but we're trying to be mindful and respectful of the fact that Mark and Jeff and their team asked me to focus on that. So that's a little bit, if people are wondering like, why is that the thing? I talked about that because I was asked to talk about it. And also, quite honestly, because I do think it's a step in the right direction. Is it the big structural change that we need? Is it repealing the uniformity clause? No. Is it taxing billionaires and millionaires as much as we should in Pennsylvania to fund our vital infrastructure? No. Is it a digital ads tax? No. And I'm not trying to be smart. I'm serious. It's none of these big structural things. Those are the fights that lie ahead. And it's really going to take all of us and the folks at Transit Forward and so many other groups pushing for this big structural change to our tax code to make sure that it's actually, keeping the best interests of middle class and low income people in Pennsylvania in mind. So yes, I agree with what Jessica said. We do absolutely have to celebrate our wins. This is a win. Actually, back in May, as Jeff was mentioning, the state house passed this, and it would have been a 30% credit. So we brought that down. That went down to a 10% credit as a result of the budget negotiations. So our preference was for a much more sizable dollar figure and percentage. It came down to 10% as a result of the 4 caucus budget negotiations. So that's House and Senate and Democrats and Republicans. So all these different parties that have to come together along with the governor's team. So we started at 30%, which would have been larger. We're glad to get 10% so that we can grow it along with some of these big structural changes. So I just want to emphasize, like, those big changes are super important to me, and I'm glad to be part of a team in the House Democratic caucus and Senate caucus that cares about these things and will continue to push for them and push for these new revenue options. That was something I saw in the chat. A lot of people asking about cannabis and about games of skill and some of these other things. I think we're going to have to explore all of these possible sources of revenue in this budget and going forward, and definitely some of these big structural changes to our tax system so that it's not upside down, which it really is right now. Working people are paying much more than they should. So yes, I look forward to a future conversation, and I truly am grateful to everybody who's on here who cares so much about this. Oh, and last thing I want to say, $800. That could be enough for folks when we talk about the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit. That could be enough for a family for a couple weeks, not for a couple months. And as Mark mentioned in the chat, that tax credit, Working Pennsylvanians tax credit, and I've talked a lot about it, so forgive me if I didn't on this particular one. That's really designed, as Mark said, to help people if there's a medical emergency or something like that, right? Suddenly there's a major emergency in their house and they have to pay a couple $100. People don't necessarily have that money in the bank to be able to dig in and pay for it. This is to help them so that they don't go into one of those downward financial spirals that people can't get out of. And that really has disastrous consequences for a lot of people. So thank you again for having me. And thank you, Jeff, for giving me the chance to speak again.
Sure. Thanks so much, Rep. Fiedler. We're really glad to have you with us. A couple questions here on revenue, which you just mentioned now, and maybe Mark may want to chime in on some of these. Jason is wondering what's the word on legal weeds, skill games, or sports betting taxes. And Walter, our friend, wants to know what's the likelihood to raise taxes in form of personal income tax or sales tax? Mark, you're muted.
If Representative Fiedler wants to answer, she can. If not, I'll be happy to.
Sorry,
Okay.
I was read the questions in the chat to see if there was anything else I should answer. Why don't you go ahead first, Mark, and then I'm glad to chime in if I have more.
Okay. I think there's a decent chance of getting the Governor Shapiro's proposals on cannabis and games of skill passed next year. You know, the games of skill, we have interest groups fighting with one another. We have casinos fighting with the video game industry. There's a lot of tensions internally, particularly in the Senate Republican caucus. I think there might be a way to get around them. As for the sales and personal income tax, we do not want them to go up in their current form. The sales tax taxes low-income people far more heavily than middle and rich people, and the personal income tax is a flat tax. We want to change that personal income tax so we tax income from work at a much lower level and income from wealth at a higher level. We want a corporate net income tax reform, so we tax multinational corporations who are incredibly wealthy. We've got a bunch of other ideas we're going to be putting forward in the next couple of weeks on how to fix a tax system that, as Rep. Fiedler says, is totally upside down. People in the bottom 20% in Pennsylvania, with an average income of about $20,000 a year, pay 15% of their income in state and local taxes. That's the highest in the entire country. This is the worst state to be really poor in when it comes to taxes. People at the very top, in the top 1%, with an average income of $1.9 million a year, pay 6% of their income in state and local taxes. We will never have enough money to fund the things that Pennsylvanians really want, to fix this $4 billion deficit, and then have more money to fix transit and higher education and workforce training and healthcare, until we start taxing rich people and wealthy corporations. And Rep. Fiedler's are perhaps our biggest supporter in the House, these ideas, and but it's not going to pass until the Senate flips. Now, we are a nonpartisan organization. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm just going to make an observation. The Republicans in state believe in three things: cutting taxes, cutting spending, and keeping wages down. And that's why we've had the government we've had so a very long time. At some point, we've got to convince the people of Pennsylvania have to make a choice, because until elections matter, until the Senate flips, we're just not going to get a lot of these good things done.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate you always advocating for the need to raise revenue. I'm going to turn it back over to Representative Fiedler. We had a couple other comments. Some folks made some notes related to some things related to home care. Those were more, I think, statements rather than questions. I think we've covered most of the questions, and so I know you were looking through the chat to see if there were other comments or questions you wanted to respond to. So we'll let you wrap up with any thoughts you have, any responses to anything we've talked about so far today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you, Mark, for the answer that you gave. I know we have only about a minute and a half. I don't really have anything in particular that I wanted to add on the topic of the Working Pennsylvanians tax credit. I do think it can be a piece. It can be a piece of the tax reform that we need. But as Mark said, you know, we have an awfully long way to go in Pennsylvania to reform our tax system. And even when we look at our neighboring states, they have made changes. They've made steps in the right direction over the last couple of years. And we really need to do that. So I think the push is going to be on for new revenue sources, whether it's the ones that you heard mentioned, games of skill or cannabis, or some of the new ideas that I won't announce them now, but I know Mark and his team are working on some options for new revenue that will be coming up soon. You know, some really creative ideas, I think, that help to get to this inequality and affordability situation that we are facing right now with all of the rising bills for energy and groceries, et cetera. So yeah, I'm just really glad to be here, and I look forward to future conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Representative Fiedler. Thank you, Mark, as well, for bringing your expertise to this. I believe Connor's already left to catch the flight. So we did thank Connor already. I want to note for folks that we do these policy action Zoom meetings to talk about the policy issues, but then also ways that folks can advocate to make these policies more than just ideas, but into reality. And that's why we do these. We typically do our federal policy meeting on the first Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. But due to some scheduling conflicts, I don't think we're doing that for December. Instead, for December, what we're going to do is do a special policy action Zoom meeting, kind of wrapping up the year 2025, looking ahead, and we will be doing that at the same time that we did this meeting today, which would be on the third Thursday in December. That would be Thursday, December 18th. We'll be doing that at 1 p.m. again. Thank you so much to all of my colleagues at the Pennsylvania Policy Center for helping out today with today's meeting. And thank you to all of you for your interest in what we're doing and your commitment to making Pennsylvania the kind of Commonwealth that we all would like to live in and would like to see move forward for our children's future. Have a great day, everybody.